And so we noticed that the problem now is what to do about Grendel. So Hrothgar has to figure out what to do, and for 12 long years he does nothing, although we are told elsewhere, I think, that men periodically go in and try themselves against Grendel. They go in, they try to fight him, and then morning light reveals them just torn to pieces in the hall. So nothing is working. Part of the problem is that, as we'll learn later, that Grendel has a magic spell on him such that he is absolutely immune to any human weapons whatsoever. So he's totally immune to human weapons. And so it turns out to be fortuitous that Beowulf, when he comes in, decides to fight him with his bare hands. That turns out to be a decisive thing for him. I also want to footnote that the irony of Grendel being descended, by the way, from Cain, when Cain's name means smith, and one of his direct offspring, a few generations after Cain, is a man named Tubal-Cain, who is, in the book of Genesis, the founder of the arts of the blacksmith. And Cain is, of course, an agriculturalist, and so you have both agriculture and the arts of the smith, without which you cannot have higher civilization. So those are essential arts. Cain is the bringer of civilization, and so it becomes an interesting irony, I think, that Grendel is directly descended from Cain, whereas he represents the principle that is antipathetic to all civilization. And so this caused the Lord of the Danes deep heartbreaking grief. So he's trying to figure out what to do. Strong men often sat in consultation, trying in vain to devise a good plan as to how best valiant men could safeguard themselves against sudden attack. At times they offered sacrifices to the idols in their pagan tabernacles, and prayed aloud to the soul slayer that he would assist them in their dire distress. Such was the custom and comfort of the heathen. They brooded in their hearts on hellish things, for the Creator, Almighty God, the judge of all actions, was neglected by them. Truly, they did not know how to praise the protector of heaven, the glorious ruler. And so the Christian poet here is acknowledging that he's telling a tale of pre-Christian men who do not yet know Christianity. Even though at several points, Hrothgar will later make a speech that is clearly of Christian inspiration and may actually have been interpolated, as Tolkien suggests in his book on Beowulf, by the poet Cynewulf. Cynewulf may have interpreted a few passages into Beowulf, and Cynewulf was a purely Christian poet, a creator and writer of Christian works like the Elena, which tells the story of Constantine's mother, Elena, and her journey to find the true, actual crosses. She goes to Jerusalem to find where Christ was crucified and unearths the actual crosses, and they become these sort of relic fetishes. One of the things that becomes interesting, one of the hooks, one of the things we have two different sign regimes here. We have the native sign regime of Scandinavian myth. Laid on top of that, then we have the Christian sign regime that has been laid on top of that through the process of Christianization, which happens on the continent much later than it does in England. But in England, there are a number of hooks whereby what Lacan would call quilting points, stitching points, whereby the two cosmologies have been welded together. One of them is, of course, the myth of the hanged man. Wotan hangs himself on a tree for 9 nights to gain wisdom, just as Christ is hanged against his will on a tree. The tree itself, Yggdrasil, is the world tree, which is often compared with the tree that Christ is crucified upon. And another one of the hooks, the continuities, is this the fetish for treasure and gold and implements and ornaments, torques, gold neck rings, and so forth, is translated in the Christian sign regime into a relic fetish. So this becomes when Elena, Constantine's mother, journeys to Jerusalem to find the true relics. She finds the actual nails that were used to nail Christ to the cross, in addition to actually unearthing the 3 crosses, and they become relics. So there's a continuity there, a shift in which the cult of treasure hoards and items, the fetish cult, is translated in the Christian sign regime to a relic fetish. So we have that continuity between the two. Woe to the man who in his wickedness commits his soul to the fire's embrace. He must expect neither comfort nor change. He will be damned forever. Joy shall be his who, when he dies, may stand before the Lord, seek peace in the embrace of our Father. And of course, our Father, it means Yahweh, the Old Testament Father. But if this had been the Scandinavian sign regime, our Father would have meant Wotan, Odin, the All-Father, which was one of his names. So there's another hook there that welds the two cosmologies together. And then we have, thus Halfdane's son endlessly brooded over the afflictions of his time. That wise warrior was altogether helpless, for the hardship upon them, violent visitations, evil events in the night, was too overwhelming, loathsome, and long-lasting. One of Huyalak's thanes, Beowulf by name, renowned among the Geats for his great bravery, heard in his own country of Grendel's crimes. He was the strongest man alive, princely and powerful, kind of like Hercules. He's the great strong man. He gave orders that a good ship should be prepared, said he would sail over the sea to assist the famous leader, the warrior king, since he needed hardy men. Wise men admired his spirit of adventure. Dear to them though he was, they encouraged the warrior and consulted the omens. Beowulf searched out the bravest of the Geats, asked them to go with him. That seasoned sailor led 14 thanes to the ship at the shore. So he's gathered up a company of 14, of which he is the 15th, to go and pay his father's debt, Ecgtheow's debt to Hrothgar, and also try to build an alliance between the Danes and the Geats. Days went by, the boat was on the water, moored under the cliff, the warriors all prepared, stepped onto the prow. The water streams eddied, stirred up sand. The men stowed gleaming armor, noble war gear deep within the ship. Then those warriors launched the well-built boat, and so began their journey. Notice that they journey north to south here. They journey from the north, in the southern tip of Sweden, south to Denmark. So it's a sort of underworld journey to the south and then back again. Whereas the voyage of St. Brendan, the Irish myth of St. Brendan, which is written down roughly contemporary with Beowulf, travels from east to west. He leaves from Ireland over the course of 7 years and travels to North America. Eventually winds up in North America over 7 years, and it's east to west. So it's in the opposite direction. So sailing has a lot to do, and the invention of the sail is something that has come recently at this time to the Northerners, to the Vikings. It made the Viking raids, which began in 787, possible. The sail made them possible, and made it possible to go and discover Iceland and Greenland and North America and so forth. And even the Irish monks may have been using it. We don't know for sure. But the sail is a new technology here that leads to the birth, or contributes anyway, to the birth of Northwestern European civilization, which is on the move with all of these ships exploring and finding new lands. Foaming at the prow and most like a seabird. Notice that the boat is compared to a bird, which gives Beowulf a kind of transcendent valency. He's like a bird going over the swan road, the waters. The boat sped over the waves, urged on by the wind, until next day at about the expected time. So far had the curved prow come that the travelers sighted land, shining cliffs, steep hills, broad headlands. So did they cross the sea. Their journey was at its end. Then the Geats disembarked, lost no time in tying up the boat. Their corselets clanked. The warriors gave thanks to God for their safe passage over the sea. Note that these people will give birth to the Vikings. The Vikings come out of the Danish, as well as the Norse, of course, the Norse and the Swedes. The Vikings come out of this whole matrix. This is a people that will give birth to the Viking raids, and this poem is written about a sea voyage right just a few decades before the Viking invasions begin in 787. This dates from something like 730, perhaps. Then on the cliff top, the Danish watchman, whose duty it was to stand guard by the shore, saw that the Geats carried flashing shields and gleaming war gear down the gangway, and his mind was riddled with curiosity. Then Hrothgar's thane leaped onto his horse, and brandishing a spear, galloped down to the shore. There he asked at once, "Warriors, who are you in your coats of mail, who have steered your tall ship over the sea lanes to these shores? I've been a coast guard here for many years, kept watch by the sea, so that no enemy band should encroach upon this Danish land and do us injury. Never have warriors carrying their shields come to this country in a more open manner. Nor were you assured of my leader's approval, my kinsman's consent. I've never set eyes on a more noble man, a warrior in armor, than one among your band. He's no mere retainer, so ennobled by his weapons. May his looks never belie him in his lordly bearing. But now before you step 1 foot further on Danish land like faithless spies, I must know your lineage, bold seafarers, strangers from afar, mark my words carefully. You would be best advised quickly to tell me the cause of your coming. And at this point, either the editor or the translator remarks that this should be contrasted with the greeting that took place in 787 when 3 ships full of Norsemen landed for the first time on the coast of England. The Coast Guard that greeted them there was immediately killed. He met with a much worse fate than this one. The man of highest standing, leader of that troop, unlocked his hoard of words and answered him. We are all Yeots, hearth companions of Huyalak. My father was famed far and wide, a noble lord, Edgethale by name. He endured many winters before he in great old age went on his way. Every wise man in this world readily recalls him. We have sailed across the sea to seek your lord, Halfdane's son, protector of the people, with most honorable intentions. Give us your guidance. We have come on an errand of importance to the great Danish prince, nor, I imagine, will the cause of our coming long remain secret. You will know whether it is true, as we have heard tell, that here among the Danes a certain evil doer, a fearful solitary, on dark nights commits deeds of unspeakable malice, damage, and slaughter. In good conscience I can counsel Hrothgar, that wise and good man, how he shall overcome the fiend, and how his anguish shall be assuaged, if indeed his fate ordains that these foul deeds should ever end and be avenged. He will suffer endless hardship otherwise, dire distress, as long as Herod, best of dwellings, stands unshaken in its lofty place. And so Beowulf tells the Coast Guard that he will, essentially, he just wants to talk first to Hrothgar and give him advice on how to deal with the situation. But the advice that he gives him will be, of course, to elect him as the warrior, to try his might against Grendel as a monster slayer. He's already, at this point, slain a number of monsters, several giants, and some sea monsters, as he'll recount shortly. Still mounted, the Coast Guard, a courageous Thane, gave him this reply. The discriminating warrior, one whose mind is keen, must perceive the difference between words and deeds. But I see you are a company well disposed towards the Danish prince. Proceed and bring your weapons and armor. I shall direct you. And I will command my companions, moreover, to guard your ship with honor against any foe. Your beached vessel, so recently caulked, until the day that that timbered craft, with its curved prow, shall carry back the beloved man across the sea currents to the shores of the storm-loving Yeots. He who dares deeds with such audacity and valor shall be granted safety in the squall of battle. Then they hurried on. The ship lay still, securely anchored. The spacious vessel rode on its hawser. The boar crest, brightly gleaming, stood over their helmets, superbly tempered, plated with glowing gold. It guarded the lives of those grim warriors. And so the warriors are coming with boar's crests on their helmets. And these are real, actual helmets that have been found by archaeologists with boars carved onto them. And it may be that they are bringing with them the cult of Freyr, or the beneficence of the god Freyr, with whom the boar was sacred. A sacred boar was made for Freyr by dwarves in a smithy, and they made it in such a way that it was self-luminous. It glowed. And so it lighted Freyr's way. Wherever he went, if it was dark, he would bring his magical boar, and the boar would light up like a miniature sun and would guide the way for him as a self-luminous being constructed in a smithy. And so the boar was sacred to Freyr, and Freyr was one of the main deities of the Swedes, but also of the Danes. He was worshipped by the Danes in the name of the god Ing, I-N-G. But all these people knew of him, and so it's possible that they are bringing with them the beneficence and fecundity. Freyr is the god, he's the sort of phallic god of the soil, the god of fecundity, the god who makes things grow and bestows good fortune upon men with crops and harvest and so forth. So perhaps they're bringing his abundance with them to try to get the gold and the treasure to flow again, because that's what's not flowing. The treasure has stopped because nobody can kill Grendel, so nobody can get reward from the king for that deed until Beowulf comes in to do it. Then they hurried on. The ship lay still in its hawser. Let's see. The Thanes made haste, marched along together until they could discern the glorious timbered hall adorned with gold. They saw there the best-known building under heaven. The ruler lived in it. Its brilliance carried across countless lands. And so we'll continue from there.